Okay, navigation's done. We're complete with it. But what about search, right? Like everything is search now. There's all kinds of money being poured into it, and people think, oh, it's a silver bullet, right? We don't need information architecture. We just are going to use search. We don't need to care where we file things. We're not going to worry about any of that stuff. That's so 1990s. Well, the truth of the matter is that search, while it's way better than it used to be, still isn't perfect. And we're going to talk about why it's not perfect, as well as what you can do about it. So there are really two key differences between an internet search or an internal search and an internet search. And this is what people say when we're talking about search is like, well, why can't it just work like Google? Well, there's two answers to that. The first one is when you're on Google, you're generally asking for a topic. If you're okay, so Google or Bing, if you're out on the internet searching, you're really looking for a topic. Hey, I need to understand about underwater basket weaving or audio production or something else. When you're inside of your intranet and you're searching for something, you're generally searching for something very specific. I've seen this before. I don't know where I put it. Maybe Joe wrote it. I just don't know where it is. And so because it's specific, the way that you search, the relevance and the ranking and all of that stuff, very, very different. The other problem, and this is a bigger one, is when you talk about search engine optimization, that's a big deal on the internet, but on an intranet it isn't, right? You don't have thousands or millions or billions of dollars to spend on search engine optimization. You've basically got to hope that the documents get to where they need to get to. In fact, Google's original thing, the reason that they became popular was because the idea was that the articles which were referenced most frequently were more valuable. Well, that's great, except on the intranet, on the inside of your organization, how many things link to each other? Not a whole lot. So we've got this situation where it's just not the same. All right, I want to give you just a simplification of search crawl, and the reason I want to do this process is because then I can explain to you why search has some challenges. So this is based on a SharePoint model, but it's the same whether you're using Google or a search appliance or whatever. So you start the gathering. You start at, say, a content source. It's a starting URL. You read the contents of that link. Generally, there's some sort of a thing that, like a protocol handler that brings that in. And by the way, Google's connection framework is called connectors or adapters, but the same thing applies. So then you take whatever's in the item and you convert it to text and links. And you add the links to the gatherer queue that you're going to go back into. You're going to remove any noise words, things like the stuff that you just really won't ever care to search for. You're going to add the words to the index. And then you're going to say, hey, are there more links available? And you're going to go back and read the link and keep going and going and going. This is obviously multi-threaded, and you can have different numbers of threads. And this is all happening at a very rapid rate as your search system is reading a link, extracting the data, putting more links in the list, and looping on this. So what's the problem with search? Well, the problem is there's an inherent delay between the time that content is added and the time content is searchable. In an intranet scenario, it might be days even before the search engine decides to index you. Internally, you can control that, but it's still a question of, is it an hour or 30 minutes or 10 minutes even? The other problem with search is that leveraging search for basic navigation and really hammering search has relatively high load. Now, there are some tools that are now using search more and more. In fact, SharePoint is one of those examples. But you have to be careful about how much you leverage and rely on search. I mean, what happens if you have to reset your search index and you have to recrawl everything? Can you do that in an hour or 10 or weeks? A lot of my larger clients, getting crawled through everything, if you have an index problem, can absolutely take weeks or in some cases months. All right, I want to play with words are not meaning for a minute or two. And words are not meaning, and this problem is search doesn't know the difference. For instance, if we use staff, if you search for the word staff, Search doesn't know whether you're talking about a type of infection, you're talking about a stick, or if you're talking about employees. So if you've got all three kinds of content in your system, you will probably get all three. What about died? Are we talking about somebody who died, they're dead? Or are we just talking about coloring clothing? What about an organ? Is it a musical instrument? Dun, 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 dun. Or is it a body part? What about SEAL? Is it a marine mammal or Navy Special Operations? Dust? Are we removing dust, right? We're dusting. Or is it covered in something? Did we dust it with powdered sugar? What about the weather? We talk about the weather, and do we mean to withstand the storm, right? Someone weathered the storm. Or do we mean that it's weathered wood, that it's been worn away? Is a strike to miss, as in a ball, or is it a hit? Did I strike someone? Workshop. Is this a place where work is done, or a place where you learn hands-on? And on and on and on. I keep going through these. And I don't want to bore you, but my point here, the point of coming to this thing is, whatever environment you live in, words are not meaning. And because of that, search is going to struggle to understand what you mean. And it's going to give you stuff that you're not expecting because the words aren't the meaning. All right, now while we're looking at search, we've got a couple of different approaches, a couple of different pieces of the puzzle, and one of them is pogo sticking. And the idea is that we get search results, we click on the result, no, that's not right. We come back, we go to the next item, we look through, oh, no, that's not right. And we come back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, if we do this, we're going to know that users aren't getting what they wanted. They're being frustrated because they're having to go back and forth. What this may indicate is a poor information sent. They're not understanding what it is we're trying to do. So information sent is this concept based on the optimal foraging theory from the 1970s. Basically, animals will always forage in the best way they possibly can. And what they do is they use cues to indicate whether there's more food in that direction, typically scent. Well, how do we do this in an information world? Are we giving the users the right part of the abstract of the document? Are we giving them the right metadata? Are we giving them who wrote it and when it was, so that they can decide without looking at the article itself whether it's likely or unlikely to solve their need? It's a very environmental or ambient sort of thing. We get a lot of the information that we get very ambiently. Well, let's take a look at that for a quick second. So Marcia Bates has done a lot of research around where we get our learning, and she's made some estimates. And she breaks things down into two dimensions. One is active versus passive. So are we actively looking, are we seeking it out, or passively are we just waiting for it to come to us? And then directed versus undirected. And directed is we're very much looking for a specific thing. I'm looking to learn how to do underwater basket weaving, or I'm looking for an interesting hobby. So inside of each of these dimensions, you have searching, then monitoring, browsing, and being aware. What Marcia estimates is that we get about 80% of the information we have based on being aware. And then we have some level of it in browsing. We're just looking for stuff and we find something interesting. Monitoring is we're interested in a topic and we catch it when it comes by. That's our reticular activating system kicking in. The 1% is searching. This is the part where we're actively and directly looking for something. That, by the way, is doing this course. So when we talk about instructor-led training or even courses like this, represents about 1% of what you're going to learn. Now, if you apply that to information sent, the better information sent is on your network, the more people are going to learn. One way to improve information sent and the ambience of things is to do something called pearl growing. And this is something that is a very curated kind of thing. You start to cross-link between information, and you make a point of building the relationships between the different pieces of content. The idea is that if somebody wants to learn about underwater basket weaving, great. Maybe they want to understand about the malleability of wood and other materials when used in water. Well, there might be a specific link that talks more about that. The thing about pearl growing is that it's very aligned to the way that adults learn. Androgyny, and Malcolm Knowles talked a lot about this, but it's very much about how do people get to a topic and then point a direction where they want to learn more. Again, this is really great if you're doing high content curation, but also pretty difficult to do if you're just trying to let users go through the systems. All right, so let's talk a bit about search in general. First of all, we all know about full text search. That's pretty passé. We know that you can do metadata-based search, so it comes out of a field. And most of us don't know that you can search for specific properties even on the internet-facing search engines. You can say author : and search just the author field of a document. In SharePoint land, that's called a managed property. There's two other kinds of search. One is federated. So if you're trying to put together an enterprise search system, but there are 5 or 10 different systems that you can't pull together, they have their own way of doing things, you can federate them. There's an open search standard that can be used to pull back results from multiple different systems. It's got its own challenges, as we'll talk about in a second. And then we have faceted search. And faceted allows you to refine based on that same metadata. And we'll talk about that more in a second as well. All right, federated search. So think about this not just from the point of view of you have multiple different systems. You've got an SAP and you've got SharePoint and you've got some other system. Think about this also for situations where you have global environments where crawling across the wire, where bringing all the data across the wire doesn't really make as much sense. The idea is that you come together and have each system index its own content, and then you bring them back into a unified display. There are some challenges with this, and not the least of which is interleaving the various different sources. It's very difficult to interleave the different sources because of different weightings of results. So you won't necessarily get one single list of search results, but at least you can get them together in the same user interface. So faceted search is refining your search by metadata. It's the ability to filter and say, oh, I only want the author where it's Rob Bogue, or I only want things authored in the last 6 months, or I only want. From a usability perspective, this is great. So I search for a keyword of underwater basket weaving, then I get facets, which help me refine my search. Oh, yep, Rob Bogue's the guy I want, and so now instead of 2,000 articles, I've got 20, and then maybe I want stuff in the last year, and that gets me down to 2. That's how faceted search is beautiful. It's a lot like using an OLAP cube, online analytical processing cube, to narrow in the values that you want to see. Before we leave search, we've got 2 things to deal with. And then one is this idea of ongoing maintenance. A lot of folks want to implement search and never do anything more with it. Well, just like information architecture, you're going to have to spend time. It's not a run, coast, set it and forget it kind of situation. You're going to have to focus on how to manage the results. And some of that is what happens when people have 0 results. Do you add a best bet or a keyword or something in the system so that it points people to a result you know is there? What do you do about taxonomy as new words come up? How do you map those to old existing articles? Searches with high pogo sticking. If you've got search terms where people go in and out and in and out and in and out, and they do a lot of hopping in and out of the search results, then you know that there's something wrong there. So you're going to have to spend some time looking at the logs, looking at the way people use it, to improve it, to tune the system to be better for your users. And certainly you do that by looking at the high usage queries first, and spend some time tweaking and telling the system what you can do to improve results. Last thing in this module is enterprise search. One of the challenges we have is information is spread out all over. Some of it's in a core system, maybe SAP or Oracle, and some of it's sitting on file shares and maybe even people's local hard drives. Some of it's in Exchange mailboxes, and Some cases, we want to look at stuff that's on competitor websites. We want to be able to search for that. So you've got to find a strategy with search that can deal with all of that. Now, it happens that SharePoint, which is one of the tools that I'm most familiar with, can do these things. It can do file shares and Exchange mailboxes and public websites. But whatever package you choose, whatever solution you choose, if you're saying we want to really get to enterprise search, because it'll allow us to, we believe, reduce our investment on information architecture, then you need to find something that really searches in all of the sources. As I said before, you may not be able to save a whole lot on information architecture work because you're going to need the same sort of work to get search to behave quite well, but at least it's an opportunity to try and leverage some of the technology without making people do so much work.